Biggie. This goes out to you. This goes out to you, and you, and you, Biggie, you.
If you're at all into rap, you always hear about the big two, Biggie and Pac. Everywhere you go, Biggie and Pac are always called the two greatest rappers of all time. Pretty much every one of your favorite rappers will mention them as an inspiration. They're hugely impactful artists from the 90s. I still listen to Tribe Called Quest, Nas, Wu-Tang, and The Pharcyde, but truthfully I'm not as deep into that era as I am the stuff that's come out during my lifetime. Recently though, I wanted to go back and check out what it is about Biggie that made him so great. Why is he brought up so often? So I listened to Ready to Die and Life After Death for the first time in nearly 5 years, and I think it finally clicked with me. Alright, so I'm just going to give a brief rundown of Biggie's backstory, and point out a few things that I think are interesting about his rise to fame. So growing up, Biggie, whose real name was Christopher Wallace by the way, was mentored by the saxophone player Donald Harrison, who happened to be living next door. Donald had played with Miles Davis and Art Blakey, and was actually teaching Biggie to become a jazz musician. Now obviously that didn't happen, but it definitely impacted the way he approached rap. Listening to artists like Max Roach and Ella Fitzgerald inspired Biggie's flow. Now, I always find it hard to describe what makes a good rap flow without getting overly technical, but I'd say it's about rhythmically going places you wouldn't expect, which is a fundamental aspect of jazz. There's a reason why the 90s are called the golden era of hip hop. You listen to stuff even from the late 80s like LL Cool J and Slick Rick, and it sounds very dated and a bit over the top. That's fine though, and they're still very influential, but compared to what would come out only a few years later, it's game over. I mean, Wu-Tang, Nas, Snoop Dogg, Tribe Called Quest, the music they were making in this era is timeless. But you listen to Biggie's flow on Ready to Die, and it's ahead of even its time. Like Nicki Minaj did a cover of a Biggie song for her album a few years back, and it still sounded fresh.
Uzi is my baby, he ain't taking the L, but he took it literally when I said go to hell.
Wait a minute, what about my honey Mary? Them jeans, they fitting like a glove. I had a crush on you since real love, huh?
The Chronic, Ready to Die, and Illmatic all came out within 2 years of each other, and were really the blueprints for future rap albums to come. The way that Nas and Biggie rapped and what they were talking about really influenced pretty much everything onwards from there, even to this day. You look at Good Kid Mad City, Forest Hills Drive, Daytona, basically anything from Joey Badass. Also, and it's an obvious thing, but I think a big part of Biggie's appeal was just how deep his voice was. It gave him an edge that no one else really sounded like him at the time. From an early age he was obese and he had a lazy eye, so he had to make up for that with his charisma and rap skills. Of course, maybe the biggest influence on Biggie was that he grew up during the crack epidemic in Brooklyn. As a teenager, Biggie would rap on the streets. You can actually find a few low-quality videos of his freestyles, but at the same time, he was also hustling drugs. It was only after coming out of jail for possession that he recorded his first demo tape. That tape ended up reaching Diddy, which was how they first met, and Big ended up getting signed pretty much on the spot. I'll just quickly explain a little bit about Puff or Diddy, or whatever nickname he goes by now, because he's a very important part of Biggie's story. Basically, Puffy founded Bad Boy Records, which Biggie and a bunch of other artists like Mace and the Lox were signed to. He mainly had a producer-rapper relationship with Big, choosing beats for him and occasionally doing ad-libs and feature verses. So when they met, you'd think the rest was history, but nope. They recorded the first half of Ready to Die, but funding ran out. This was also around the time that Big's first daughter was born, which was why he then went back to selling drugs. At that point, Puff gave Biggie an ultimatum and just laid it out like, you can either choose hustling or rap. You can either come with me and do music, or go back to that, but you can't do both. One of the things I noticed going back to Ready to Die is, on the one hand, it has all these dark and gritty songs about a life of crime. And then mixed in there's also some really lighthearted, almost tongue-in-cheek stuff. Basically, Puff wanted Big to rap over beats that had a more mainstream appeal. So that's where we get songs like Juicy and Big Poppa. Big Poppa even uses that G-Funk sound that Dr. Dre had popularized with The Chronic. So where Biggie brought the talent, Puff was responsible for molding him to reach a wider audience. Now on most albums, those tracks would stick out like sore thumbs when put next to all these gangster rap songs. But Biggie makes it work because of his charisma. This might be a hot take, but I think the hook on Juicy isn't great, and sounds really dated. It's Biggie's relatable storytelling in the verses that saves it. As far as Big Poppa goes, it's hard to imagine anyone else rapping over that. If not for Biggie's bassy voice, that beat would feel way too slow and dragged out. But in my opinion, what's easily Biggie's best song is Everyday Struggle. This comes around the middle of the album, and truthfully, it sticks out. On songs like Gimme the Loot and Warning, Big presented himself with this almost larger-than-life gangster personality. He seems untouchable. There's even a skit at the end of Warning where he snipes two dudes trying to rob his house. But all of that is stripped away on Everyday Struggle. There's nothing glamorous about this song whatsoever. As a rapper, probably Biggie's downside is he didn't have a ton of range as far as the topics he rapped about go. He has a lot of songs that are purely him bragging about all his money and success. That said, I think he made up for this with emotional versatility. On songs like this, Big flat out describes being a drug dealer for what it actually is: constant paranoia and stress.
I know how it feel to wake up fucked up. Pockets broke as hell, another rock to sell. People look at you like you's the user, selling drugs to all the losers, mad Buddha abuser.
Biggie's albums have the cinematic layer to them in the concepts and storytelling, but you do get the sense that he could be pretty cynical. When Ready to Die was half finished, he didn't think rap was going to work out, and he wasn't sure if that career would actually amount to anything. Coming from Bed-Stuy in the 80s, he could have big dreams, but the idea that they could come true seemed unreasonable. I think here's a good place to talk about the theme of death in Biggie's music. It's such an obvious point, but it is kind of eerie that for all of his talk about being ready to die, he did end up being murdered at only 24. I think death coming up a lot in his verses speaks to the urgency that Biggie felt throughout his life. Tomorrow wasn't promised for him, so in everything he did, he went all in. Even though the way it ended was tragic, there is actually a lot of hope in Biggie's story looking back on it. This was a guy who would have done anything to make sure his mum and daughter were taken care of and living well. And at a young age, he was successful in doing that through using his gifts. Again, the interesting thing is, Biggie's approach to rap wasn't necessarily taking influence from other rappers. It was actually from other genres where he became inspired. In the Netflix documentary that dropped a few years back, Diddy even mentioned that Big took from singers and how he approached songwriting. This is the thing, to be a great artist, you have to know more than just one skill, and you have to know about things outside of your niche. I think Biggie is a testament to that. He knew about these other genres. He knew about what made a pop or R&B track work. Biggie also visited Jamaica a lot during his childhood, because his mum was from there. So he combined all that knowledge to make just really good songs at the end of the day, that had catchy hooks and all that. At first, Biggie wrote his lyrics in journals, and then eventually, like Jay-Z, he could simply think through what he was going to rap, and then just record it off the top. So of course, after the success of Ready to Die, which came out in 1994, Big took almost 3 years to work on the next one, Life After Death. And in that time, a lot of stuff happened. Nas and Jay-Z took off, Bad Boy became the biggest thing in hip-hop alongside Death Row, and of course Tupac died, and that whole beef happened. So even though Biggie had told his whole life story from birth until suicide on Ready to Die, he now had new stories to tell. Life After Death talks a lot more about its experiences in the music industry. This album has a ton of Biggie's absolute best stuff. I mean, truly peak hip-hop songs. Hypnotize, Kick in the Door, 10 Crack Commandments, and that's just scratching the surface. The album does have a few filler tracks in my opinion, and some of the beats feel overproduced at points, but for a double album that's almost 2 hours long, it has a pretty smooth pace. Biggie just took his storytelling to another level on this project. The album opens with Somebody's Gotta Die, which is this operatic tale of him going after a man named Jason who killed his friend. On the surface, it's just a simple story of revenge, but really Biggie's talking about cycles of violence, and it becomes a cautionary tale. In the final verse, Biggie kills Jason, but ends up traumatizing his daughter in the process. The song has this lush string arrangement that builds up and incorporates all these sound effects as well. This word gets thrown around a lot, but it feels immersive. Then you listen to a track like What's Beef, where Big compares what real life gang wars look like to how he would retaliate in a rap beef. It's so cold-hearted, and he even calls himself the devil at one point. You can only imagine how influential this song would have been to an artist like Pusha T. Particularly in the third verse, you hear a lot of similarities in their flow.
Straight torture. Look what that slick shit bought ya. A first class ticket to Lucifer.
We only in the sport to be LeBron's. When you use the platinum, that gold be bronze.
Sadly, Biggie died before the album was released, so Diddy promoted the album for him. Out of this, we got one of the most memorable music videos of all time, with Mo Money, Mo Problems, which was directed by Hype Williams. Visually, it just looks expensive, with all these flashy visuals and that fisheye lens. It's perfectly over the top, and it's hard to listen to the song again without thinking about that video. So what made Biggie so great? Between his innovative flows, his iconic punchlines, and his unrivaled presence on the mic, there's so much to mention. But most of all, I think it was his autobiographical storytelling. The imagery in his lyrics is so vivid, and even though he only made 2 albums in his lifetime, there's so much there to go back to, and he provided endless inspiration to not only rappers, but artists across the board. Before I wrap this up, I'll just drop a few of my favorite Biggie songs. If you've made it this far through the video, firstly thank you, and if you haven't already, drop a like and subscribe. So first up, I have Victory from Puffy's No Way Out album. It's hard not to get hyped listening to this song. It sounds like Biggie's rapping over the Rocky theme or something. Perfect song to do this to. Then I got Unbelievable, which was produced by DJ Premier. It's really just Biggie bragging with clever wordplay over a really fun beat. From Life After Death I have Miss You, which is one of Biggie's most emotional songs. The song is dedicated to 3 of his friends who were killed in drug-related violence. Biggie reminisces about the good times with them that were cut short. And finally I'll pick Things Done Changed, which is the first song on Ready to Die. The song is just pure hip-hop. The way it layers 4 samples, this is what you point to as a masterpiece of the genre. It perfectly lays the groundwork for the album, with Biggie illustrating how dangerous Brooklyn's become. Okay, I'll say one more. Brooklyn's Finest with Jay-Z is amazing. Hearing those 2 icons trade bars back and forth on that song, it doesn't get much better than that.
Such a charismatic, charming, incredible storyteller, likable guy. He's forever loved by hip hop. That's it. It's Biggie.
Because
it's just the way he was. His honesty, his brutal honesty. You know, black and ugly as ever. However, I stay Coochie down to the socks. You know, like he can do that. Like a Richard Pryor, he was in that way, where he can make fun of himself. You know, and he was just such a charismatic person.
Live from Bedford-Stuyvesant, the livest one, representing BK to the fullest. Gats I pull it, bastards ducking when Big be bucking. Chicken heads be clucking in my back room fucking. It ain't nothing. They know Big be handling with the Mac in the act.